Hey, welcome back. It's Warrior Collective, Stuart Tomlinson. It's great to be back on the podcast. Okay, so for today, I have a phenomenal guest lined up for you. Someone I'm really excited about introducing to you if you've not already come across his amazing work, and that's Dr. Jim Afremow. Now, Dr. Jim Afremow is the author of multiple books, The Champion's Mind, The Young Champion's Mind, Champion's Comeback, and is also a world-renowned sports psychologist and many other accolades for his work. But I won't leave it any further. Jim, can I call you Jim? Is that okay? It's amazing to have you on.
Thanks so much, Stuart. It's great to be with you and with your audience today. So I really appreciate it. Looking forward to a fun discussion.
No, well, for anyone who's not maybe come across your work before, I mean, I first came across it and I've got it here. I was just showing it to you for those who can see. The Champion's Mind. It's my welcome copy that I've read multiple times from front to back. And realistically, it's about mindset and improving mindset and mental performance in elite sports. I'm sure you could give a better kind of description, but would you think that's a good little kind of tagline, I suppose?
Yeah, I think that's a great the way that you said it. Peak performance is peak performance. And so whether it's in sports or, to be honest, in any area of life, any achievement domain, the way we think about it and ourselves is going to determine how well we do. And so I always like to say that we might not have the wingspan of Michael Phelps or the fast twitch muscle fibers of Usain Bolt, but there's nothing preventing us from thinking like them and becoming our own champion. So yeah, that's the great thing, is that we could all learn to think, feel, and act like a champion in our own lives.
Yeah, I mean, obviously my audience, as you know, is typically from the fighting sports, the martial arts, and I'm guessing it's quite well known actually that fighting sports are quite mentally challenging because of the nature of the contact. It's person versus person, and obviously it's up at elite level. It's on big stages. Would you obviously you've been across multiple high level sports? What do you think are they all pretty similar? Or do you think some sports are mentally more challenging than others?
Well, I definitely think that I have worked with several UFC fighters, and I do think the challenges are a little different in that, for example, if I work with, let's say, a baseball player in America, if they have a bad game, there's always a next game, the next day. Whereas, as you know, in combat sports, you might have to wait several months. And so I think in combat sports, the highs are much higher and the lows are much lower, depending on how well you do.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. So from obviously, if you've worked with some UFC fighters before, obviously you don't need to name names, but what do you see are the particular challenges to athletes in combat sports from a mental performance aspect then?
Well, it's really interesting because most non-combat sport athletes or fans would think that their biggest fear is, the physical harm that they could sustain in a fight. And it's actually more of the emotional harm or, being embarrassed, underperforming, letting their fight team down, their family watching if, they don't perform well. And so that tends to be an area of concern that we tend to work on.
So obviously, like many sports, there are gyms and there are teams that seem to put out multiple high-level fighters. Have they cracked the code then for coaching mental preparation, or is it more of a byproduct because of the talent pool that they've got? Because I've got to say, I've never really come across, and I've traveled a lot, I've never really come across a system that is obviously purely dedicated to coaching the mental aspect alongside the physical. Obviously, we do so many drills, we spar, we grapple, we prepare ourselves physically, but the mental aspect seems something of a byproduct at times. Is there a system then that these top teams are plugging into, or is it just a nature of the groups that they have?
Yeah, I think it's, obviously a combination, but I do think that most, training centers and most sports organizations undervalue mindset to their own detriment. And I think the best coaches throughout history have been really plugged in to mindset. And so we definitely don't want to leave that to chance or circumstance. And so, I like to say that, just like you work on your physical game, you need to work on your mental game. So mental game push-ups or sit-ups would be things like self-talk, goal setting, visualization, breathing techniques, and so on. And we tend to do those, a little bit spontaneously or as a small part of our training. But I think if we made it just a little bit bigger part of our training, it would definitely pay off much better for us.
Yeah, I mean, I used to compete a lot when I was younger, and obviously I don't think that there was really much said about the mental preparation other than, if you're in shape, you're fit, you're going to be confident, and that's obviously one of the main things. But I came up with my own kind of pre-fight rituals, pre-fight things that I needed to do. And I guess some athletes just by chance have developed their own similar concepts to what you've just said. Is that something you tend to come across?
Yeah, and that's so true, is that a lot of the champions throughout history across different sports have kind of come up with that on their own, or they were just, maybe in the right place at the right time and had the right amount of support. But as the world is getting more and more competitive and, because it's more global now, when I worked for the San Francisco Giants baseball organization, for example, there were players from all over the world. And so, you have to find every edge you can get. And so you can't just leave it to chance in terms of your mental game. The same, I was the sports psychologist for about a decade at Arizona State University. And there were athletes across all the different sports there from Australia and Austria and England and, Canada and all over the place. And so, again, we're competing against everyone now. And that little bit extra, in terms of what's going on between the ears, a lot of times does make the biggest difference.
So obviously you wrote the young champion's mind, and I have an actual real interest in coaching juniors and the grassroots. How important do you see these aspects starting early on then in a young athlete's kind of coaching?
Yeah, I think the misconception is that younger athletes are too young to start mental training. And I think it's the opposite. I think these are life skills. And so I've been fortunate enough to work with some very young athletes, and it's about developing emotional resilience and mental toughness. And the response I usually get back from the younger athletes and their parents and coaches is, hey, my son or daughter or my team, they're having more fun than ever. They're doing better than ever. And this is helping them in school and other areas of life as well. So they might not do the same type of mental training or to the same extent, but they can at least get started. And, the first place to always start would be things like gratitude. What are you grateful for in your life right now or in your sport right now? Breathing techniques are really important as well, as you know. My daughter is interesting. She's 9 years old. She just turned 10 actually over the weekend. But I remember when she was having a temper tantrum at about age 2, my wife said, hey, why don't you teach her some of the stuff that you teach the pro athletes? And I said, she's too young. And she says, why is she too young to learn breathing techniques? And so I had to be a little creative with it, but, we sat down and did some belly breathing together, and then she calmed down, and then she started using that on her own. So it's just an example of kind of the younger, the better. And then kids are sponges too. So they'll pick it up a lot quicker.
So for any coach listening now who coaches combat sports, martial arts too, and again, stereotypically, there's a lot of juniors who do martial arts, aren't there? Just because it's a great activity for youngsters. And martial arts has always been about respect and discipline, which is why a lot of people take their children to martial arts. But from a coach's point of view, for someone who wants athletic performance, maybe it's a wrestling coach or a boxing coach or a Muay Thai coach or any coach, what would you say would be some good steps to introduce today or, over the next month or two to help their junior students or junior athletes develop in this way?
I think a really great idea would be to introduce and even carve out a little time each day for one or more mental skills to start learning and practicing. So, this today or this week could be about visualization. So let's spend a few minutes visualizing yourself, in terms of achieving the outcome that you want, but also the ideal steps that will lead to that outcome. And then using all your senses, so really see it and feel it, and as if you were to open your own eyes, you would be right there doing it. And so that's what visualization is doing in our head what we normally do with our body. So picking a different mental skill each day or each week to really focus on, I think, would be really helpful.
And obviously, with one of the things that you mentioned earlier is within combat sports, there are real highs and real lows. And I know you've written about this and spoken about this, but how can people, young or old, prepare for setbacks and failures in this arena? Obviously, I think sometimes fighting sports feels very personal. You've been beat by someone, you've been hurt, maybe been knocked out. And again, in today's society, there can be a bit of a social media circus surrounding that, can't they? Whereas people are getting involved, it's very hyped up, and the aftermath of that, it can be difficult to recover from. How do you suggest fighters deal with that aspect of it today?
I think first and foremost, it's important to look at the big picture of one's career and have a mastery approach rather than an ego orientation. So the mastery approach would be, I'm always going to be a student, and I'm going to try to get better today than I was yesterday, and from one fight to the next, and that I'll never truly arrive at the finish line. I've had athletes that have asked that, am I ever going to really get there with the mental game or the physical game? And what I like to say is that would actually be a pretty sad day if you didn't think you could get better with the mental game or the physical game. I think we could always make smaller improvements, and that's the challenge. Is as the better you get, the smaller the improvements are going to probably be. But looking at the big picture, I think it's easier to say, there's going to be some ups and downs. And when I have those ups, let's really celebrate those. Let's be proud of what I have accomplished and give myself credit where credit is due. And then when I have some setbacks or some failures, I've actually been fortunate enough to work with some, pro and Olympic athletes that have said, those make me even more driven. Because number one, I kind of saw how close I was to accomplishing my goal there. So I know what it takes now. And then, I always have my biggest breakthroughs after I have that setback, because it kind of forces me to learn from it and to maybe try something new. So I think that, winning a lot of times makes us happy, and losing sometimes makes us wise. So try to take the good with the bad and realize that if you keep getting better one day to the next, you're going to find out that you're going to, have a pretty good career.
And, so obviously when you've been taken into Arizona State, like you said earlier on, and you're looking around the room and you're looking at everyone, how can you spot someone who's maybe a mentally, I don't want to use the word weak, but underprepared athlete, and then someone who's, it's a mentally strong kind of athlete or practitioner in their sport? How do you define the difference, and can you spot them quite easy?
Well, I think that, usually I would say whenever I work with a team or I'm around a group of athletes, I would say 1/3 of them are not interested at all in the mental game until there's a problem, or that they think that, I need to have a problem in order to work on my mental game. I would say 1/3 are on the fence, my ears are open, my eyes are open, what do you have to offer? I'll check it out. And then I think 1/3 are really bought in. And anything I can do that will help, I'm willing to try. And so, I think that's something that's really cool when a leader on a team, and usually the better athletes are the ones that say, hey, I'm open-minded, and then, it does help that they know some of the people that I have worked with in the past. So a lot of my referrals are word of mouth and so on. So that certainly helps. But a lot of times the best players on the team are the ones that are most interested, and then they get everyone on board. So I think that's pretty cool. In terms of, just, who's mentally strong or who's not, I think body language is really important. And so if you're watching a practice or a competition, how do they carry themselves? How do they walk? You could take a look at their eyes and so on. And that tells you whether they're present and whether they're in a good frame of mind usually. And then when we're not, we need to do our best to kind of give off the impression that everything's okay, because when our body language is down, we're telling everyone around us to beat us now. And that's not the message that you want to give to everyone. You also don't want to, give the message to your teammates that you can't count on me.
Yeah. And obviously, we talk about the body language there, and I know you've mentioned it to me before, but when you work with these athletes then, there's a build-up, isn't there, to competition, and every sport has that different build-up, don't they? Some are like long and some are every week, and so the pre kind of build-up's going to be different from each sport, but I'm guessing they'll share common factors, common denominators. So in terms of pre-performance then, what would you recommend as good ideas for someone to get into the habit of doing as they lead up to their competition, no matter what the sport is?
I think it's important to, as you're preparing for a major competition, is to spend your time at night having big goals and dreams and seeing yourself accomplishing those big goals and dreams and getting excited about them. I think that really puts us really gets us excited about what we're going to be doing. And then I think during the day, our focus needs to be on deliberate practice, which is when I show up to, for my workout or training session, I need to be all there. I need to be all in. And the outside needs to stay outside. So my personal life goes in my mental locker. I step in the gym. And, my ultimate goal is to get better today. And so I'm going to be focused. I'm going to give 100% effort. The switch is going to be on. And then when I do leave, I'm going to be able to flip the switch off so that I could get my rest and recovery. I think that in terms of approaching major competitions, a lot of athletes, feel that, I wish I had another week. I wish I had another month to get ready. And so I always go back to the Muhammad Ali quote, which, he said, don't count the days, make each day count. So just focusing on making each day count, I think, is really important. And then the day of a competition, I think it's having a set routine that you can follow, and that really calms the mind because you can follow the exact same steps so that you normally do. And so even if it's a unique opponent that you're fighting, it's still the same thing. And so what you need to do is just be the same person, follow those same steps, and let them unfold in front of you. So when it's time to perform, you just need to be yourself.
So, going from that, obviously there can be anxiety and fear, especially in fighting sports, and it's a funny one. When I was younger, I was never afraid of the other person, and you touched upon it earlier on, funnily enough. My anxiety in the beginning was always performance anxiety in front of a crowd. Like you said, it was like, I don't want to look stupid in front of these people. And one of the ways I used to deal with it was, whereas some people would sit and watch others fight, I found that I couldn't do that. It would send my adrenaline off, and I'd be all over the place. So I would take myself away into secluded areas and just go through my own rituals until it was my turn to fight, and then I would come out at that point. But I'm guessing it's different for different people. What kind of methods would you recommend to help a fighter dealing with their anxieties and fears, on the run up or just before getting into the ring or cage and whatever fight they're doing?
Yeah, this is such an important topic, and it's there's a lot of good stuff that we could talk about with this topic. I do think that first and foremost, we often talk about what's your why. Why do you do what you do? But I think what is even just as important is who you do it for. And I think that you need to do it for yourself, for your own self, and your own joy and your own satisfaction. And so if you do that, then the expectations from others and the concerns about others become much more secondary. And so, in terms of people coming to watch, I think that that doesn't mean that you have to change anything just because more people are watching. And the neat thing, though, too, is I know that Serena Williams has talked about in terms of large crowds. She'll get nervous beforehand and she'll say, "Hey, I'm about to go do what I love to do, and people are here because they love watching my sport." And so that's pretty cool. And so that helps to relax her. But I do think that, I'm doing this for myself and my family. I'm not doing it for the people that are watching, in terms of being the main priority. I think that helps you to focus on your own performance and not be a spectator of yourself. I do think, though, that it's also important to mention that, I like to say to athletes that if you aren't feeling any pressure or any pre-performance anxiety, that means you probably need to hang up the gloves, because you should be feeling a little bit of that because you take great pride in what you do. You care about your performance, and those nerves give you an edge. They help to sharpen your senses. And so imagine trying to fight another person if your heart rate was at resting. You're not going to do very well. So to actually embrace the nerves, run toward the pressure, and you've worked really, really hard to be in that moment. So be in that moment and enjoy that moment and really savor that opportunity, because usually when you think about it, if we're feeling nerves and we're feeling some pressure, we are in a really good position. That means we've been working hard and we've earned the right to be in that position. So that's where you want to be, in that position.
So when it comes to, like I'm using fighting sports as an example because of that's obviously what we're talking about because of my audience. But with regards to fights, then, if someone, because sometimes we get people who haven't been beat and they're made out to be this monster, and you're not going to win, and there's a lot of negative talk, isn't there, from outside, and that can sometimes affect, and you sometimes see that affect fighters. You can kind of see that actually this talk has got to them. Obviously, because you've worked with UFC fighters, you might have seen this aspect before. How would you deal with that with a fighter who's being affected by that kind of negative talk?
I think that if you're the underdog or you're the favorite, either way you have to spin it and use it to your advantage. And so if you're the underdog, I think it's important to say, "Hey, what my opponent has accomplished in the past is in the past. And, this is a brand new fight and all the pressure is on them. And I like my chances." And, I think that a lot of times we tend to compare ourselves unfavorably to others. And I like to say, love the fighter that you are and be okay with the fighter that you're not. Because I think a lot of times we look around, oh man, he or she could do something I can't do. Well, you could probably do things they can't do as well. So use that to your advantage, that, what, all the pressure's on them. I'm coming in with everything I've got. And, they might beat me 9 out of 10 times if we fought 10 times, but today's the day that I'm going to beat them. And then I think if you are the favorite, you have to use that to your advantage and say, "You know what? People believe in me. I've earned the right to be considered the favorite. And I love being the guy that everyone's chasing. I love being the one that everyone's coming after. And so give me your best shot because I want to fight the best." And so I think that's important, while realizing that, I might be the champion right now. It's up for grabs, today. But I've done it before and I could do it again. And that's the great thing, that, in terms of confidence, is looking back on what you have accomplished and saying, I have done it before and I can do it again. Now, some athletes might say, "Well, I haven't done it at this level yet." And, one of the things we'll talk about is, well, you have done it at a lower level, but it's still the same sport and you're still the same person. And so if you've done it before, you could still use that to your advantage in terms of building some confidence for yourself.
And if you were in the corner of a fighter, box a 12-round fight, 12 rounds is a long time to be in there, and the fight can change. It can be going for you, it can go in against you, can't it? You've been knocked down. The only way you can win is knockout. How does a coach in that corner utilize that this mental conditioning to try and bring their athlete back from the edge?
I think ideally before the fight, you would have about 4 or 5 different scenarios in terms of what you're talking about, that you would have already visualized yourself being in those situations and what you might say to yourself, or what you might want your corner to say to you in those situations. So when you're in those situations, it's almost like I've been here before and I know what to do. I think the main thing on the day of a fight or a major competition, if we're talking about other sports, is to underreact to everything. And I think that, and that's in terms of being, in terms of composure. And that's such a key quality of champions, is they tend to underreact to everything. And I've never heard an athlete, and I never will, that will say after a competition, I should have overreacted more out there. So usually, we might get hurt early and then we overreact, instead of, hey, exactly what you said, this is a long fight. They had their run, now I'm going to make my run. Henry Cejudo, when he beat Demetrius Johnson in their rematch to win the title, he twisted his ankle early in the fight. And it was kind of a freak accident, and he hurt himself a little bit there. And what he ended up saying to himself over and over again is composure, composure, composure. And that helped to settle him down. And then he ended up turning the tide on Demetrius, who was considered, as we were talking about earlier, he was considered the pound for pound best fighter in the world at the time, mixed martial artist at the time. And Henry, just with his cool and calmness and, just being a paragon of poise in that moment and using that positive self-talk, was able to steady himself, recenter, and then go on and win the fight, and then ended up winning several belts, and is considered one of the greatest combat sportsmen of all time, including from winning his Olympic gold medal in wrestling. So I think that's a great story in terms of just maintaining our composure when things aren't going well in the moment.
And I'm guessing you've had it because in the nature of your work, where you've been called in, and maybe a team has, they're on a losing streak, they've lost the confidence, and it always comes down to that mental aspect, doesn't it? They're on a losing streak, And again, if we talk about fighting sports, someone's lost 3 fights on the bounce, and people are talking, I should retire, and then all of a sudden, maybe they get a resurge, a revival. How do these people get this comeback when it feels like everything's on the skids?
I think either they, on the one hand, it depends on the person. A lot of the top athletes that I've been fortunate enough to work with, they don't read anything about themselves. Their attitude is, it's my choice whether I go online or not, and it's my choice whether I read anything about me or not, and I'm just not going to do it. And, I'm reminded of the story, again, of, bringing up Serena Williams again, is she said early on in her career, she would read articles about herself in different magazines, and if it was a good article, she would get almost, too excited, and like maybe even start feeling a little bit complacent, in terms of, I got this, and she didn't want that feeling. And then if it was a negative article, she felt like, oh, that's terrible and that's unfair, and then she kind of got down in the dumps about it. And so she figured out, what's best for me is if I see an article on me in a magazine, I'm just going to look at the pictures because I like fashion. And so she, like, hey, what am I wearing in those pictures? But I'm not going to read anything they say about me. I think there's other athletes that really feed off of that, and they use it as motivational fuel. And so, perfect example is Michael Phelps. And when Ian Thorpe and some other top swimmers were saying, hey, there's no way he could win 8 Olympic gold medals in one games, Michael Phelps, when he would hear that from a reporter, would say, tell me more. I want to hear more about that, because that just gets me more excited to do it. And so I think it's important sometimes to, I'm going to use that to prove people wrong, or, but most importantly, I'm going to do this to prove myself right. And so a lot of that, to be honest, is noise, and it's just, how can I get better today? And if I keep doing that, I'm going to love my comeback more than I hated that setback or those 3 losses in a row.
It's funny when you started talking about that, you kind of reminded me of a conversation I was having with someone recently, and it was about the talk that you get from the people closest to you. For junior athletes, it's the parents. Maybe for older athletes, it's family. And you sometimes get, especially with parents, oh, you're the best in the world, no one can beat you, and they're doing it for the right reasons. But you kind of see these people sometimes feel under the pressure, or maybe kind of they've given the wrong picture of themselves when they step up in class or they step up. What's your opinion on that kind of talk, given what you've just said?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a balance there, and then there's in terms of when you receive that positive, those positive affirmations. And so, I love the attitude is, train like you're number two, but then compete like you're number one. So I think that if all you received was the positive, then that might not be helpful. And then certainly if all you receive is the negative, we know that's not going to be helpful. So I think there's a time and a place for that. But I do think that it's important in terms of what you're working on and how you're getting better and the progress you're making. But what I have found with some of the best athletes in the world is they're willing to tell the truth about themselves, and they're willing to be around other people that are that will tell the truth about them in terms of, hey, here's what you're doing well, and here's what you need to do better. Because otherwise, we could get really delusional about what we're doing and not work on the things that we really need to work on. I do think that the closer you get to a fight or to a competition, I think it's you really need to feel like I'm the best in the world at what I do, and I respect the competition, but I love my stuff more than their stuff.
And I guess another word that crops up a lot in coaching, I'm guessing across the board, but in fighting sports, is accountability. You've got to be accountable for your own training. The coach has got to be accountable for their input. So it's that responsibility of roles, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you need to have a healthy dependence on your fight team. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to, really be a good listener, really ask good questions, and then bring your best attitude and effort to the gym each day. And that's, perfect opportunity for demonstrating that has been during this time of COVID. And, and that's where I've challenged athletes in terms of this is the perfect opportunity to show the world how self-disciplined you are, because you might not have those people around you as much as before, reminding you of all the things that you need to be doing or that you should be doing. And so that's why it's important to have the accountability and being proactive in your own sport and life.
Yeah, and I mean, going off this topic a little bit, one of the things that you mentioned to me before was about the 4 C's. How does that fit into your system of approaching in terms of improving someone's mental performance, or is it something that people take away and then utilize themselves?
Well, typically when I work with an athlete or another performer, I've worked with musicians and actors and all different types of performers. We tend to talk about confidence, concentration, composure, and commitment. And those are the 4 C's that I think are the building blocks of mental toughness. And so for me, mental toughness is staying positive and proactive when it's hard to stay positive and proactive. So it might be one of those days where you're having an off day and you feel like silver, but you need to find a way to bring a gold performance out of yourself. Or, it might be one of those early morning workouts where you're already sore from the day before and you just want to stay in bed and sleep in, but you need to get out there and hit the road and get your run in. Or it could be just you're down in a fight like we talked about before, and somehow you need to rally and get the job done. And so that to me is what mental toughness is all about. Anyone could have a great mindset when things are going well, but can you have a great mindset when things aren't going well yet? And so that's what mental toughness or mental resilience is to me. Whereas I think the old school definition of mental toughness would be more along the lines of gritting your teeth and, being yelled at and risking injury and those kind of things, which I think is something totally different. Now, commitment to me is, one of my favorite questions that I like to ask athletes is, on a 1 to 10 scale, how committed are you to achieving your big goals and dreams in your sport? And if the answer I get back is anything less than 10, basically what that person is telling me is they're giving themselves an out. That they're actually not putting their best foot forward. And so what I'll do sometimes is, in kind of tongue-in-cheek way, is I'll say, okay, that's fine, that this is your game, this is your life, but come back to me when it's a 10, and then we'll work together. Because, this isn't supposed to be easy. This is going to be really hard. And then if they do tell me it's a 10, I'll ask them, would that be something that your coaches and teammates and other people say that you're 10 out of 10 on your commitment? And it's really interesting. A lot of times they'll say, well, maybe not. And so then we need to talk about, okay, what do you need to start doing differently so that the people around you would be willing to say that your commitment is a 10 out of 10 in terms of your performance. And I think it's important in terms of commitment is realizing that it's not just about working hard, it's about working smart, and it's about doing the things outside of the gym that help you when you do go in the gym. So your rest and recovery, working on your mindset, nutrition, and those kind of things as well.
So whether someone's a coach or an athlete listening or watching this podcast, is there a system that they can buy that is like okay, if because obviously I'm not quite sure what else apart from your fantastic books. Do you have something that you kind of prepare, like an app or a website that has these concepts that people can register or buy? What's the best way that people can learn about and apply what the things that we're talking about now? Is it all just across the books, or is it on other things as well?
Well, I actually do have a brand new app out, and it's called Champions Mind app. And the whole idea is that a little bit of mental training each and every day is much better than, maybe a block of mental training every once in a while. And so on the app, a lot of the skills and strategies that I discuss in the book, the Champion's Mind, and then the Champion's Comeback and the Young Champion's Mind, I have those as audio programs on the book where you could actually, close your eyes and visualize yourself performing, or close your eyes and go through mindfulness training, or close your eyes and work on gratitude to put yourself in a winning frame of mind for the day. So there's all different sorts of topics on there, including mental health, which is really important. Without mental health, we don't have any health, and being in need is not being in trouble. So there's a lot of tips on there about worry management, anger management, how to get help, and those kind of things as well. But the app is portable, which is really helpful, because a lot of times I'll have athletes that say, "Hey, you're not available when I need you in the morning or at night, or when I'm on the road," and so. It's kind of a fun way to have a sports psychologist in your pocket where you could push a button and get what you want in that moment. And so could even be like, I had a hard practice, or, hard day working out. I need to listen to some relaxation exercises. And so the app has tons of audios on all different types of topics, and then you become your own sports psychologist.
Yeah, sounds amazing. I had heard of the app. I've just not used it. I'm definitely going to go and check that out, because, like I said, I've known about the books since reading The Champion's Mind. So I'm always interested in learning more about what you do. So that sounds amazing. So I'm guessing that's just Android, Apple. Just go on the Play Store and download the app.
Absolutely. And you go to Champions Mind app. We have a website, and it's really neat. A lot of college teams, a lot of pro athletes, Olympic athletes, and athletes from over 100 countries are already starting to use it. And, I like to think of the mental game as, kind of the final frontier. And it's one of those things that, especially during COVID and just, how challenging life can be at times, that when we need help in this area, we need it. And so we need it available to us in the moment. And so we're getting a lot of good feedback on the app.
Oh, I can believe it. I'm going to be checking it out myself when we finish this podcast. So you've been across. One of the things I love about obviously Champion's Mind. This was the first book that I read from you. Is obviously diversity across high level individuals from across different sports. So if you had to kind of distill your experiences then into 5 maybe tips, what 5 tips would you say to a fighter or a coach listening to this now that they can take away, apart from obviously what we've talked about, or maybe including what we've talked about? What would be the 5 top tips for improving their mental performance going forward from this point?
Well, I would say number one is, so the motto of the Champion's Mind is think gold and never settle for silver. And so what I mean by that is thinking gold is having big dreams and big goals and big ideas. I think a lot of times we limit ourselves. And why set artificial limits on what we can accomplish? And so think big and never settle for silver, which is being anything less than your very best. And so I think it always starts with that. One of my favorite stories in the Champion's Mind is from Natalie Cook, and I don't know if you remember this, but she grew up in Australia, and she fell in love with beach volleyball. And her grandfather told her, "Hey, have big goals, have big dreams in your sport. Why not you, Natalie?" And so she really embraced that idea and told the whole world, or at least her world, I want to win an Olympic gold medal in volleyball, in beach volleyball. And as we know, Australia is big that's a big sport in Australia. So anyway, long story short, she ended up dedicating herself to winning the gold medal in beach volleyball and surrounded herself with the color gold. She really just gold pajamas, gold colored pajamas, and gold colored watch, and gold everything. Painted her nails gold. And anyway, she ended up winning the gold medal in Australia at the 2000 Olympics in Sydney, and achieved her dream. And she was actually asked, if you hadn't won the gold medal, then what, Natalie? And she had the best answer ever. She said, if I didn't win the gold medal, I would have painted whatever medal I got gold. And so it's about living having a gold medal life, and it's about the journey being golden. So step number one is have a big goal and a big dream, and then put everything you have into it in terms of what we talked about in terms of commitment. Number two, I would say, is do something every day to get a little bit better in one facet of your game. And so that's daily acts of excellence. And so again, it doesn't have to be a big thing, or it doesn't have to be the same thing. It could be in terms of just more rest and recovery, or it could be, I'm going to work more on mindfulness. So it doesn't have to be something at the gym or, in terms of working out even. I think number three is have an attitude of gratitude. And I think most of us get pretty entitled, and, we expect things, we demand things, we take things for granted in our sport. And I think that gratitude really frees us up emotionally to be at our best. And so an example of that is a guy named Eric Wood. He was an all-pro football player for the Buffalo Bills. And what he found most helpful for him is when he would drive to the stadium each day for practice, he would turn off the radio and have a gratitude drive, is what he called it. And so he would just think about, like, how lucky am I to be playing in the NFL? How lucky am I to have a wife and a daughter, that support me and love me? How lucky am I to be, to have such great teammates and such great coaches? And he said that just having that gratitude drive to work each day with the radio turned off, once he got in the building, he was ready to go, and he was feeling great and ready for his day. And so I think that, that's something that we could all, to be honest, probably do better at. And, one little tip there is just each night think about 2 or 3 things from our day that we're thankful for and grateful for, that we really appreciate in our life, or that happened earlier in that day. I think another idea that's really important is, having a breathing technique that you could lean on. We have about 20,000, we take about 20,000 breaths per day. And I would say that most of us are mindful of very few of those breaths. And I'm reminded of the story where a Zen student went to a Zen master and he said, "This breathing stuff is really boring. What's the deal with this breathing stuff?" And the Zen master grabbed him by the back of the head and tipped him over and shoved his head into a large bucket of water and held him under the water for a little bit and then pulled him out, and the poor student was gasping for air, and the Zen master looked at him and he said, "How boring is breathing right now for you?" And so it's just kind of a reminder that we take for granted just breathing even. And what I love about breathing, it's such a great anchor for being in the present moment. And so being more present, I think, is when we're at our best and we're less stressed. There's a saying in sports psychology that I really love, which is there's no pressure in the present moment. Most of the stuff we worry about is in the future, or we're upset about things that happened earlier in the past. And so the breath is something that we should focus on and be a little more conscious of each day. I think another thing is, we talked about body language, is just being a little bit more aware of kind of how we carry ourselves throughout our day. When we're tired, a lot of times we act tired. When we're not happy, we act unhappy. And I think that a great way to change our mood is to change our body language. And then finally, to me, self-talk is the most important skill of all, because the most important words we ever hear are the words that we say to ourselves. And unfortunately, our brains are hardwired for negativity. We all have a negativity bias, and that's to keep us safe. And so we have roughly, I've heard anywhere from 6 to 80,000 thoughts per day, and that 80% of those thoughts, up to 80% of them, are either really repetitive thoughts, what am I having for dinner? What am I having for dinner? Or they're negative. I suck, I'm terrible, I'm awful. And so just being aware of our negative self-talk and either countering it, challenging it, or just noticing it as a thought and not necessarily buying into that thought and letting it pass by like a cloud in the sky, I think is important. Because too often we're not really self-aware of what we're thinking and saying to ourselves. And like I said, it's usually negative. So negativity, I love the saying that positivity doesn't always help, but negativity almost always hurts. And so we definitely want to get a hold of our self-talk. And the reason we do is because life, and especially in combat sports, it'll beat you up all by itself. And so why help it with negative self-talk? So affirmations and positive self-talk are really important.
No, I mean that's an amazing list, and I agree completely. And it's funny how some things, when you say them, they're almost like common sense, but they need to be pointed out to people, don't they? It's and that's the nature of I guess being human is, you get caught up and you just miss the simple things of what can help change things for the better. Well, I've really enjoyed having you on this podcast. It's been amazing to have you on. For anyone who wants to learn more about yourself, what's the website? Can you give the website for people to go and visit?
Sure. My website is goldmedalmind.net, and on Twitter it's goldmedalmind. And then I'm recently started an account on Instagram, and it's Jim Afremow. And then for the app, it's Champion's Mind. And so you should be able to find that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, a lot of this is common sense, but as we've heard, common sense isn't always so common. And, I think that in most sports, it's important when we're not doing well to go back to the fundamentals of what we're doing in our sport. And the same thing with mindset is, and that's where I like to say, be brilliant with the basics. So if we can be brilliant with the fundamentals, they're always going to be really helpful for us.
No, I couldn't agree more. I love the fact that this is now a podcast that I can listen back to and use it as a kind of an inspiration alongside obviously the books and obviously the app that I'm going to be checking out. But thank you once again for joining me, and anyone listening, I cannot recommend Dr. Afremow's work enough to you. Go and buy his amazing books. I've had my copies for a long time now as they've come out, and like me, go and check out the app today. But thank you once again for sparing the time to talk to us all.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for everyone listening, and let's all have a gold medal life and learn from each other and help each other. So thank you so much for having me
Oh,
on
thank
today.
you.